But when it specifically is dealing with hormones in men, and there are several hormones we think about. Most men are going to think about testosterone, right? And by and large, that one has the greatest effect on us, negatively or positively. But estradiol, for example, estradiol is an incredibly important hormone for both men and women, especially when it comes to aging and cardiovascular health and dementia prevention, bone health. I mean, there's so many things that are beneficial about things like estradiol that we just take for granted or assume, oh, that's just for women.
You're listening to the Nutrition World Podcast, a show about navigating the intricacies of holistic wellness. We're a natural health food store located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we believe that optimal health and peak performance should be accessible to everyone.
Let me tell you, there's a focus of health that I think we all know, we all kind of respect, but then many of us don't delve into it. It's something I have talked about for over 4 decades, and it's hormones and hormone replacements. Today we have Josh Porter. Welcome to Nutrition World Podcast.
Hey, thank you, Ed, for having me.
My take on this, and I know people who listen to me know that I start rambling, but that's hopefully helpful in some cases. I have observed the fact that nutrition, as massively important as it is, lifestyle and exercise, sometimes though there's a missing gap as we age. And I always say this, Father Time is relatively cruel to us past the age of 40-ish to 50-ish. We're put on this earth, I think, design-wise to do one single thing. That's to procreate.
Correct.
That is to have babies. And that's one reason why we have far more ideal hormones in the early ages and stages of our life. And hormones are chemical messengers. They actually are directing our body like an orchestra director could direct us. And I say this quite often, too, in consultations when women especially, and some men, talk to me about, do I need hormones? And I say, I don't think you might probably not live another extra day with or without them. It's about quality of life. And I used to kind of dismiss it when I was younger, because obviously mine were pretty darn good.
Right.
And most of us are at 30, 35, about 40-ish, they start really, in many people, declining. And I started feeling that decline without recognizing that it actually was hormones. And despite the fact that, eating properly, exercising, and doing, very aggressive nutrients, anti-aging things as I do, there was still a missing link. And it had to do with, stamina, sense of well-being, libido, actually not, I won't say antidepressant wise, but it boosted the mood when I found ways to balance my hormones. And one of those is, of course, doing testing. And we have a lab here at Nutrition World that does testing. You have a lab. You actually, you've been a physician assistant for 12 years. You own a business, OptimizeU, which is a clinic that is specializing in safe and effective ways to manage hormones. And today's podcast is on the men's version, and then we'll be doing part 2 on women's in a very short order. And before I even let you talk, I'm going to say one more thing. Chattanooga, and I think most towns, are replete with a lot of these pop-up clinics that are tea clinics, and some for women, some for men, both. And I'm not always pleased with them. I don't see that they focus on, one, health. You can't do anything in regard to pharmaceuticals, I believe, unless you also have some schooling and some skills in balancing that with things that will reduce any risk and help you to be healthier. And some of these clinics are simply trying to raise numbers on a piece of paper.
Right.
And that, to me, can be disastrous. And so I've learned of you through very good sources, probably a year and a half ago, and just was like, wow, this guy sounds like the real deal, and because you were already doing it. And luckily, we made a partnership, and now we are able to talk about you, and you offer services to people that I 100% recommend because you're doing it the right way, pretty easy way too, and it's the latest, and it's not old school. So let's talk about men's hormones at this point. And I will say, a lot of what we're going to talk about is, and if people, especially men, have gone to the doctor and they're 50 and they say, Doc, check my hormones. Oh, you're fine. You're normal. Don't let anyone tell you normal is optimal.
Right.
It is not. I actually do a podcast called The Holistic Navigator, and I have one called Understanding Blood Chemistry. And if you'll Google The Holistic Navigator, with the title Understanding Blood Chemistry, it explains from a physician friend of mine and myself talking about it's disastrous to be in the normal ranges. We need to be in optimal, and we actually talk about what these optimal ranges are for health. So again, welcome to Nutritionals Podcast, Josh. Tell us about, first off, what do hormones do? And we can say that for men and women, but specifically today on men.
Well, I think, and thank you, by the way. And one of the things I'll say is, as far as even within our partnership that's been beneficial to us, is having people around us where we do get to treat the whole person, right? So I may be a specialist in hormone optimization, but it is very routinely that I'm recommending my patients to go talk to you or to Adam or someone else up there at Nutrition World to discuss some things, whether it's supplements or nutrition, and so because I think it is about treating the whole person. But when it specifically is dealing with hormones in men, and there are several hormones we think about. Most men are going to think about testosterone, right? And by and large, that one has the greatest effect on us, negatively or positively. But estradiol, for example, estradiol is an incredibly important hormone for both men and women, especially when it comes to aging and cardiovascular health and dementia prevention, bone health. I mean, there's so many things that are beneficial about things like estradiol that we just take for granted or assume, oh, that's just for women. But when it pertains to testosterone, so around 35, I think you said 35, 40, around the age of 35, what we typically see is about a 1% to 2% decline in our testosterone levels annually. So it is in some ways, it is a matter of when will we be affected by that, right? When will we be symptomatic? Some people are 42, some people are 62, but at some point, generally the light bulb goes off, if you will, and says, God, something's wrong here. My libido's off, my quality of life, what I refer to as vitality of life. As a man, you kind of wake up in your 20s with this attitude of, I'm going to seize this day, I'm going to conquer today. And we lose that, and it's a gradual loss for a lot of men to the point where we don't realize it until it's almost too late, and then they come to me, right? But that vitality of life is something that's very affected in men when it comes to low testosterone. And so those are the things that we look for. Energy level is a very common one. Weight gain, right? So and I see this a lot, Ed, in that I may have somebody who's really dialed in nutritionally, right? So maybe they've seen you guys first and they're doing all the right things. They're hitting the gym. But I'll get the common complaint of, I just feel like I'm giving everything I've got and I cannot seem to even stay at a level that I'm happy with, right? It's like this gradual decline, but they're hitting the gym 5 days a week. They're eating clean, they're taking their supplements. And so that frustration just kind of builds and builds and builds until they come to me and they're like, what are we going to do here? Something's got to give. So that's kind of the gist of when it comes to, testosterone in particular with men, of the type of symptoms that we see.
And I want to talk about, and thank you so much, great explanation. And I think men who the light's starting to go off can resonate with exactly what you said, because it is a slow process. You don't wake up one morning with low T,
right,
or terribly imbalanced estrogen or something. But once you kind of think about it, now many people will go to their regular doc, not throwing them under the bus. But the thing is, many of those are old school, and they still think testosterone is dangerous. Oh, it's going to cause more prostate cancer. Well, actually, we're now looking at studies that say low testosterone could be aggravating that whole gland. Now, we'll say, and you can certainly clarify this, if a person has full-blown prostate cancer, they will do different things. Absolutely. But as far as blood clotting, those things, those two issues, a lot of old schoolers are going to say, run, do not do this. Right. This is harmful. Well, guess what? Not having an optimized health to me is harmful, because I'm not here to live a ton of extra years. In fact, I say this often on my podcast. I'm not really sure I'm going to live a lot longer than normal, but what I know for a fact is the quality of my life is. I'm already 65. I've lived extremely good quality of life. And just throw something else out here. One thing that causes low testosterone is not sleeping.
Correct.
And so I'm a huge fan of helping to address people with sleep. I have a sleep ebook on nutritionw.com. You type in sleep ebook, and it has all the steps that I have used in my chronic insomniac life. The only thing not in there is Delta 9, which we sell now, which has helped me very much. But lack of sleep can really do that. A bad marriage can do it, a bad relationship, terrible stress, missing too many meals. There's many things that can negate this. Using things in the environment that are anti-testosterone, that are like plastic estrogens, those will also do that. Now, so these are parts of this conversation that, as much as you do, you still have to kind of think about these other things. You're drinking bottles of water all day long that's probably been sat in a warehouse and with 100-degree temperature. You're getting some freaking imbalanced phytochemicals in there that are awful. So back to the main topic here. What I love about you, Josh, is the old school is, and of course, I've been in a gym my whole life. There's, bodybuilders do different. We're not talking about bodybuilding hormones. We're talking about optimizing, which you could be an athlete and optimize. There are people who abuse this. There's no doubt. Usually it's black market. We're not talking about it. We're talking about things that's going to help you your life in so many ways with minimal risk, because you know how to minimize that risk. And also, the administration that you do is different than anyone else. So someone who's listening who said, "Oh, I'm already doing it," don't just think that you might be better at doing it a different way. And when you explain to me how you did this with actually smaller needles, so that it's far less discomforting, in fact, almost no discomfort at all. And the other thing you're doing, Josh, and I know I'm way ahead of the game because I'm talking for you, is, to me, hormones should not be a roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's what's happening in many of these clinics, and even people who are normal or healthcare professionals will say, "Okay, I'll give you a prescription for testosterone cypionate. Here's you some needles and do it once a week." You have got a system, and I love your system of keeping it very balanced, making it very easy, and everything's under one package. So everything when they come to you, everything's handled.
We take care of it all. Yeah.
So tell me,
well, and so I think a lot to unpack there. But one thing I'll say, let's talk about normal is not optimal.
Yes.
Right. So when you look at the idea of, I'm within normal range. Well, what is that range? That range is generally an average of old, sick patients. Right. Yes. So why would I want to be on the low end of an old, sick patient population? I want to be on the upper end of that population of people, or at least at a comparison of a 40-year-old if I'm 55, right? And so I think that is something we have to take into account. Now, here's the other thing that's interesting. I think 2007, maybe even a little later, they actually, prior to 2007, you did not have to have a lab number to treat low testosterone. But the FDA came in, said, no, you've got to have, 2 separate tests below the level of 300. It has to be measured at 8 a.m. in the morning, which is when it's at its lowest, in an effort to prevent the ability for prescribers to give out testosterone. So it was, and you could make the case there, is it in an effort to lessen costs on Medicare and things of that nature, right, with the patient population. So when you factor those things in, and then you realize, in some ways, your primary care providers they're handcuffed, right? If they've got this one little narrow box of where they can use it, then they can't really get outside of that box with insurance. So one of the things that we do that kind of sets ourselves apart, to your point, is we don't deal with insurance. We do accept some health savings accounts and things like that, but we offer a monthly concierge service that encompasses your follow-ups, your labs, your medical supplies, and your medications. And so it is just a really easy, simple, and patients love it. I mean, patients love the idea of, listen, I don't have to worry about getting my meds. They get sent to my house. When they need supplies, they come to our office and pick it up. So that part is great. When it comes to the issues of blood clots or prostate cancer, 75 years ago, there was a physician, Dr. Huggins, who did a study on prostate cancer with 3 participants, 2 of which did not complete the study. But out of that study is where we had this idea that testosterone was like pouring gasoline on a prostate cancer.
That long ago?
That long ago.
That's where it came from.
And it stayed like that up until this guy, Dr. Abraham Morgentaler out of Harvard, really kind of became invested in this. He's a urologist, but in men's health with testosterone and hormone replacement. So he started looking at this, and he developed what's called the saturation model based off of all the evidence. And so what that says is, can testosterone enlarge a man's prostate, or even further, if someone has a prostate cancer, could it accelerate the growth? Well, all the data shows that it's very rare. So if a man's testosterone level is below 200, which is incredibly low, I mean, it generally is never that low. But if it is, and they had a true prostate cancer, there is a level of growth that could occur in that prostate cancer with testosterone. Anything above 300, it never changes, right? So if you've got an undiagnosed prostate cancer that you did not know, and someone started you on testosterone, it would not worsen your prostate cancer. Does that make sense? So there is so out of that, he developed and realized, like, there's because we have androgen receptors on our prostate, and so it's kind of like a shriveled up piece of fruit that, until you add a little bit of substance to it, it grows to a level of full saturation. So that would be the deal with prostate. And so all the evidence, to your point, that shows the lower a man's testosterone level, the higher the risk of prostate cancer. And now some of that makes sense, right? The older we get, the higher the risk we have of prostate cancer. So it's an association, because the older we get, the lower our testosterone level is going to be. The same thing with cardiovascular disease. So the studies in 2013, 2014 that came out that said, don't prescribe testosterone, it's going to cause a blood clot. Well, they were poorly designed studies. They were 2 retrospective observational studies that were really look-back studies on insurance database. And as a result, 29 medical societies actually wrote to the journal and said, you should redact this article. Like, this is not legit, which they did not. The FDA then went on to put a black box warning on it. But again, all the research has shown that if you want to allow a man to have, and even a female, to have a cardiovascular event, let their testosterone level be low, right? So the association is cardiovascular risk and mortality is high when your testosterone level is low, not elevated.
I love it. And I used to always say this a lot. I believe in research. There's no doubt. I think honest research, not one that's bought and paid for research. I mean, that's where all this, with the COVID, follow the science. Yep. Well, you only follow the honest science. You can't follow the dishonest science. And the British Medical Journal just a few months ago said that 51% of all editors of medical journals are paid substantial funds. Well, if that's the person that's choosing what goes into the journals, they can't be objective. They can't. Right. But again, I go back to this word that I used to use a lot, is ancient wisdom. I think, yes, science is so important, but I think having a type of intuition wisdom is also, if we have that wisdom, you have to think of 2 things. If testosterone is going to be harmful to the heart and the prostate, why do not 22-year-olds have heart attacks and prostate cancer? Nature put it in there for a very good reason.
That's right.
And if we do it correctly, then I think that ancient wisdom by itself says we're going to benefit from this.
Right.
Now, one thing you do, which is, again, different, is the administration of this testosterone. Tell listeners how you do it differently.
Yeah, so we use testosterone and enanthate, and not to get lost in the weeds, but you've got different types of esters, and those are carrying molecules that allow the testosterone to be absorbed, right? So you've got enanthate, cypionate, propionate, undecanoate. All those are different molecules, and they have different half-lives. Majority of people in the United States use cypionate. It's incredibly cheap, and it's effective. But the question is it the best, right? And so enanthate's a little bit of a purer substance. It's a little bit more costly. It's actually the most commonly prescribed in the world. But we use enanthate primarily for one reason, is that you can do it subcutaneously and get great levels. It has a greater effect on lean muscle mass, and it has a less negative effect on blood pressure. So that you're getting a lot of positives and less negatives. And so and again, you can tolerate, and if anyone's ever done an intramuscular injection with an inch and a half needle, I mean, it's not uncommon for those patients to, say, man, I couldn't walk for 2 days. I put that in the wrong spot. And here you're doing it in the flank or in the, the love handle or even in the abdomen, a tiny little insulin-sized needle, and patients tolerate it great.
See, that's what I love about us partnering with people who are on the cutting edge. there are so few people who write a prescription for enanthate and they all write cypionate. Well, it's old school. I don't mind people not really wanting to learn. You just came back from Utah. You're constantly studying with clinics and with organizations. That's how you stay above and keep up with everything. And luckily, you know, I certainly try to do the same thing with nutrition. These are the people we need as our team members. We don't need those who are still falling back on the 1980s, 1990s kind of myths that they got plugged into their head. And yes, insulin needles are so little. I mean, there's times where I do a lot of peptides with insulin needles and things that once in a blue moon I feel it, but most times I don't even feel it when it goes in. And so with that, you're doing multiple times, a little bit more often than some people prescribe. That keeps the blood level more level.
Correct.
And again, your kind of setup is they come to you, you do blood work, you do a consultation. If they're a candidate, everything's taken care of. Like they're going to get their prescription in the mail. They're going to get their syringes. They're going to get the blood testing from you. They're going to have access to you or your staff for questions. You don't see this anywhere else that I have seen.
Yeah, and one of the things too is when it comes to dosing, again, trying to match physiologically, right? So if we know that a medication has a half-life of 7 days, then if you give one dose a week, you're going to bottom out, right? So that day 5 and 6, and this is a very common complaint that patients will have. So what we do is we subdivide the dose. So you're still getting the exact same amount weekly, but you're doing it twice a week so that you don't have that same fallout. Patients can also, one of the things that testosterone does is it creates what's called erythrocytosis, okay? So that is an increase in your red blood cells, hematocrit, hemoglobin. Some patients can be a little sensitive to that and they can feel a little fatigued and things of that nature. You can actually microdose it even further down. So you can divide your dose into 3 times a week for less negative effects such as that if something like that has an effect on you. But the other thing is, you know, and I always jokingly say, I don't know that I can do this forever, but most of my patients know they can get in touch with me almost anytime, right? Whether it's through email, phone number, you know, a text message through the system, there's always a way, because to us, that's the only way we can really partner with our patients and have an impact, right? I've had patients where they've been on something for, you know, 3 or 4 weeks, and I just call in to check on them, and they say, hey, you know, here's how I'm taking my medication, and realize really quickly, like, you're not taking it correctly. So, but they don't know that you don't know what you don't know. And so we take a great deal of a passion in really trying to make sure that we're giving our patients everything we got, you know.
I love it. In fact, you know, and we talked about this last week, I referred another client of mine to you, and, you know, he's a great friend of mine, a little bit older than I am. Well, he was on kind of an old school, old-fashioned, not up to the current standards of too many things to balance his hormones. And I know just through the grapevine and from him telling me, you kind of rearranged the whole platform and program. I knew he needed that desperately. He's been doing the same old thing for way too long. And again, I talk about creating team members. We have to have team members as we age that or have your passion and is on more of the cutting edge. And lastly, personalizes things for us. We can't have a team member where you call and leave 3 messages and they don't call you back, or they call you a week later and some nurse says, well, that's what he said, so just do it. That is definitely old school. And I know that the struggle is sometimes with insurance, because when you pay cash, you have a lot more influence. You have people who have to work harder because they're not getting insurance reimbursement, and they're also happier people because they're not being ruled by the insurance company. So they feel more passionate. After a period of years, you get burned out with the other system. There's no doubt. So I love the fact that you are in the place of doing this for people. And again, it's not just men, it's women and men. What percent of your people are men? I know it's probably more than 50%.
It's probably 60-40.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the one thing I'll tell you about women is they tell other women. Men, I don't know that men do that all that well, you know. Or I'll see a female patient, and next week I'll see her husband.
Oh yeah, well,
I have that a lot.
I bet you do. Or vice versa. Either way,
or vice versa. But yeah, you're so right, Ed, in that. You know, some of the older methods, right? So one of the things, testosterone breaks down into what's called DHT, which is a very potent anabolic androgenic effect, right?
Let's talk about that for hair loss.
Yes. So I'll tell you this, less than 1% of men are going to be affected by it. And it's generally the men that you already kind of knew, right? If you saw the back of my head, you would know I have male pattern baldness. My father had it. You could see it in the lineage. When I started testosterone, it did not negatively impact that. Okay.
Do you think it's because the enanthate is better, or
no?
Just
there's a saturation effect on the hair follicle.
Okay.
And so it does not necessarily make you lose hair quicker. Now, if you hit it just at the right time where that pattern starts, obviously you could make the association. But you can treat it if somebody is really sensitive to a male pattern baldness. But the problem is you knock out so many beneficial effects of what testosterone does, right? Oh. So the DHT conversion is the lean muscle mass. It is the vitality. It is what makes us feel like a man. And so when you block that in an effort to limit somebody's hair loss, well, you're losing so much of the benefit.
Did not know that.
And that was the situation with your referral. Is so you've got he's on a medication, so he's receiving testosterone, but he's on a medication that blocks the one conversion of testosterone to DHT, which is not great. But the other conversion that testosterone does is it converts to estradiol, right? So going back to what we said, that's beneficial for cardiovascular and
up to a point.
Up to a point.
Okay.
But exogenously, and I'll explain the difference. But he was on a medication that blocked that simply because that was just the train of thought. Now, to your point, there is a difference between endogenous and exogenous, right? So endogenous, elevated levels of estradiol,
and that's what's produced within the body,
right, has been associated with cardiovascular problems in men. Well, we got to ask ourselves, why does a man who's not receiving testosterone exogenously through administration, why does he have a high estrogen level? By and large, it's because he's producing it from adipose tissue. So the association would be he's also overweight, right? And so could it be that the endogenous level of estradiol that's elevated is simply because you've got an unhealthy patient with central obesity or visceral fat that then leads to cardiovascular? Because you don't see the same clinical findings on those outcome studies when someone's estradiol level goes up with administration of testosterone. It's a little different in what you see.
Okay. I'm just throwing this out, and I think I know the answer, and we'll start winding things down. I think you both treat the piece of paper that you test, but you also treat the feedback from the patient, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
You don't just say, "Oh, I want you at this number," because you need to listen to the patient. And let's just say if I ask you, I'm 65, I weigh 173 pounds. I work out 5 days a week, as you know. I see you at the gym. What would be what was your experience would be the probable healthy range for me if I want to be truly optimized?
So if you're talking about a total testosterone,
yes,
you're probably looking somewhere, and again, wide range, right? Because everybody's a little different. 700 to 1,200.
Okay. And then we have something called free testosterone.
Free testosterone, which you get different levels between, some lab services like Path Group or Quest. We use LabCorp, so when I refer to these numbers, I'm referring to the test that we use. But by and large, most of the gentlemen in the 60 plus range, age-wise, I'm looking for their free testosterone to be upper teens to mid-20s. And that generally is a great spot. But I'll tell you something else that I take this very serious. I do not look at someone's labs before I sit down with them. And the reason I don't do that is because I don't want to have a preconceived idea of what they need. And so everybody, it's a very common question when somebody sits down with me and they'll say, well, what did my lab show? And I'll say, I don't know yet. We're going to find out together. Because it's not fair to that patient if I have in my head, oh, this guy needs testosterone. Well, what if his level's not there, or even if his symptoms don't match it, right? And so it's just and the same thing applies to females. And I do the exact same thing with my follow-ups because everybody wants to know, where do my levels go to? Well, I want to know, hey, how was your sex drive? How's your energy level? How's your clarity of mind? And then if we go and look and your free testosterone's 12, but it was 6 when we started, well, I don't want you to get defeated because it didn't go up to high teens. I'm going to say, man, we got to win here, right? Like, look at all these symptoms we improved on. So I think you've got to treat the patient over the lab, whether it's low normal or whether it's high normal or optimal. I think the patient matters.
Well, and again, you've explained it extremely well. You go if a person's been to their physician and they did a test for testosterone and they said, "Oh, your testosterone is normal." Well, what was it, doctor? Well, it's 472. And they didn't test a free. Free
Correct.
is actually what's working. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the total is kind of what's going through the serum. The free is what's kind of going in the cell. Really, what goes in the cell is what counts. And that's also true of nutrient testing. We do a lot of nutrient testing, and like red blood cell magnesium. If it's a serum magnesium test, it's worthless. If it's a red blood cell magnesium test, that's what's in the blood cell. So again, the devil is in the details. Find team members who know their stuff backwards and forwards, and also care about the patient and client. For people who want to learn, who's excited about this, I know they will be when hearing it. What would be their next step? What do they need, and how do they need to do this?
Well, there's a few different ways. We have a pretty consistent feedback on social media. So we do a lot of posting on Instagram, and you can find us at Optimize U Chat.
And Optimize U is with a U.
With a U, the letter U, yes, sir. And we're also on Facebook. We have OptimizeU Chattanooga.com. And then you can call our office at 423-206-9753.
That's wonderful. And you also have other expanded services, which is going to be really cool. We're talking about cryo.
Yeah.
And
red light therapy, infrared therapy. We're doing IV therapy now for recovery. And that's been a huge hit so far.
Yeah. So you'll be doing the vitamin C IVs and things.
Glutathione.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's an exciting time. It truly is. And I have never been more inspired by what I do because we now have so many more tools in our toolbox, and we have trusted individuals like yourself. Chattanooga's come a pretty good long ways. I just told you when I came in, I just did hyperbaric over a great place on East Burn Road. I try all things. I'm the guinea pig, and I do it. I say, yes, this worked for me. No, it didn't work for me, but I can at least tell you and look you in the eye and say, this is how it works.
That's right.
So empowering people is kind of the passion of my life, whether they're our client or customer or not. Empowering them with knowledge and information. That's why I do the radio show, Vital Health Radio. That's why I do the podcast, The Holistic Navigators, to educate, not to sell. If we don't, I've said this many times. I kind of separate the world into two classes of people: those who are learners and those who are not learners. If you're a not learner, you're going to be doomed as you get past 50 because you're going to trust the old school advice that is not working. We have a nation full of people who are extremely unhealthy, and they're not getting any better. This is because they're getting the same normal advice, and they're also, the healthcare practitioners are in a broken system. It's not all their fault. They only have 8 minutes to talk to you. How are they going to ask you about your sleep and your food and how clean of water you're drinking? And they're not. They can't. So they're frustrated. You're frustrated. We have to step out of that. Keep the regular doc for the gatekeeper, but then you got to have your team around.
Yes.
I believe you are a king daddy of the team member in the conversation of this. So thank you so much for spending your time this morning. And again, Optimize U with a U. And of course, we have your business cards at Nutrition World.
Yes.
And if somebody can't come to you, as they can do a Zoom consultation, but like you said, they have to see you one time a year.
Just one time a year, they have to be in the clinic. But otherwise, we can do phone calls, Zoom calls, things like that for follow-ups. We can send labs to, any LabCorp in the United States. So we try to make it convenient to our patients.
Wow. What a great service. Thank you, Josh, so much.
Thank you.